What is communism? A simple explanation. Part 2. I'm D. Elizabeth Glasgow, and I'm your lecturer for this series. Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels published their book, The Communist Manifesto, in 1848. At that time, much of the Western world followed a course where individuals owned private property, business enterprises, and the profits that resulted from those investments. Now, Marx and Engels were outraged by what they saw as the wide gap between the wealthy and the working class. In their book, Marx and Engels reveal what they saw as an uneven distribution of wealth in the capitalist world, and they predicted a worldwide popular uprising by the working classes in order to distribute wealth more equitably. Marx and Engels believed that capitalism was irretrievably broken, that it was outmoded, that as an economic system it exploited workers, and those workers, Marx and Engels believed, would eventually rise up against the wealthy because the poor were so unfairly treated. Marx and Engels argued that communism would eventually replace capitalism, and since that time nations have wrestled with which direction to turn their economies. Communism is based on principles that are meant to correct the problems caused by capitalism. The most important of these principles is that no private property, no private ownership of property should be allowed. This is because Marx and Engels believed that private ownership encouraged greed and that it motivated people to eliminate competition no matter the consequences. Marx and Engels argued that property should be shared and that the masses, not the elite few, should ultimately control the economy. Now, in their calculation, government should exercise the control in the name of the people, at least in the transition between capitalism and communism. Again, the goal was to eliminate the gap between the rich and the poor and bring about economic parity. Now let's talk about the basics. Like other socialists, Marx and Engels sought to end capitalism and the systems which they perceived were responsible for the exploitation of workers. But whereas early socialists often favored longer-term social reform, Marx and Engels believed that popular revolution was the inevitable solution and the only path to socialism. According to the Marxist argument for communism, the main characteristic of human life in class society is alienation, and communism is desirable because it entails the full realization of human freedom, according to Marx and Engels. Marx here follows George Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel in conceiving freedom not merely as the absence of restraints, but as action with content. Marx and Engels believed that communism allowed people to do what they want, but also put humans in such conditions and such relations with one another that they would not wish to have any need for exploitation. Whereas for Hegel, the unfolding of this ethical life in history is mainly driven by the realm of ideas. For Marx and Engels, communism emerged from material forces, particularly the development of the means of production. Marx and Engels hold that a process of class conflict and revolutionary struggle will result in victory for the proletariat, the people, and the establishment of a communist party in which private ownership is abolished over time and the means of production and subsistence will belong to the community. Marx himself wrote little about life under communism, giving only the most general indication as to what constituted a communist society. It is clear that it entails abundance, in which there is little limit to the projects that humans may undertake. In this popular slogan that was adopted by the communist movement, communism was a world in which each gave according to their abilities and received according to their needs. The German ideology was one of Marx's few writings that elaborated on the communist future. He wrote, "In communist society, where no one has one exclusive sphere of activity, but each can become accomplished in any branch he wishes, society regulates the general production, and thus makes it possible for me to do one thing today and another tomorrow, to hunt in the morning, fish in the afternoon, rear cattle in the evening, criticize after dinner, just as I have a mind, without ever becoming hunter, fisherman, herdsman, or critic." Marx and Engels' vision was to add this vision to a positive scientific theory of how society was moving in a law-governed way toward communism, and with tension, a political theory that explained why revolutionary activity was required to bring it about. Although the term communism refers to specific political parties, at its core, communism is an ideology of economic equality through the elimination of private property. As envisioned by Marx, the beliefs of communism center around the idea that inequality and suffering result from capitalism. It is under capitalism, Marx and Engels believed, that private businesses and corporations owned the factories, the equipment, and other resources called the means of production. These owners, according to Marx, exploit workers who are forced to sell their labor for wages. The working class, or what Marx and Engels called the proletariat, will eventually rise up against the capitalist owners, or what Marx and Engels called the bourgeoisie. In this uprising, the proletariat will instill the ideals of communism, thereby instituting a new society with no private property, no economic class, and no profits. Now let's look at a couple of examples of communism. First, pure communism. Pure communism is an economic, political, and social system where most of all property and resources are collectively owned by a class-free society, rather than individual citizens. In the Communist Manifesto, Marx and Engels iterated that pure communism would result in a society in which all people would be equal, and there would be no need for money or the accumulation of individual wealth. There would be no private ownership of economic resources. The central government would control all facets of the production of goods and services. Economic output would be distributed according to the needs of the people, and the social friction between white and blue-collar workers, between rural and urban cultures, would be eliminated, thus freeing each person to achieve his or her highest human potential. Marx and Engels did not address the social categories of race, gender, and sexuality, but later proponents did so by iterating that this friction between the social categories and the dominant culture would be eliminated as well, once class inequality and wealth disparity were eliminated. Of course, all of this has been vigorously debated by scholars, by political practitioners, historians, and laypersons. Under pure communism, the central government provides the people with all of their basic necessities, like food, housing, education, medical care, etc., thereby allowing the people to share equally in the benefits of collective labor. Free access to resources would depend on constant technological innovation, contributing to ever greater production. Marx's famous statement in this regard is applicable here: from each according to his ability, to each according to his needs. In the late 19th century, the term socialism and communism were often used interchangeably. However, Marx and Engels argued that communism would not emerge from capitalism in a fully developed state, but would pass through a first phase in which most productive property was owned in common, but with some class differences remaining. This first stage, or phase, would eventually give way to a higher phase, in which class differences were eliminated, and a state was no longer needed. Lenin frequently used the term socialism to refer to Marx and Engels' supposed first phase of communism, and used the term communism interchangeably with Marx and Engels' higher phase of communism. These latter aspects, particularly as developed by Lenin, provided the underpinning for the mobilizing features of 20th century communist parties. Later writers, like Louis Althusser, modified Marx's vision by allotting a central place to the state in the development of such societies, by arguing for a prolonged transition period of socialism prior to the attainment of full communism. In part 2 of this lecture, we'll look at the different types of communism, like Stalinism, Maoism, and Leninism. I'm D. Elizabeth Glasgow. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe.